First of all, welcome everybody. Welcome in particular Dione, who, if it wasn't for her, this wouldn't be happening at all, because there wouldn't be an Orwell Society that's heading for its 10th anniversary. And welcome to people who we know are far flung. Sylvia in Canada, obviously Chris in California, Michael in the Midwest. It's wonderful also that I know from the list of people who said they were coming that we have people who have not previously been able to come to any other events. So welcome if this is your first Orwell Society event. We've decided to do what we're calling George Talks, because the feedback we had from you all after the AGM was so positive. We thought that this was a way of, whether we're in lockdown or not, it's a way of being able to provide regular events for members that is not constrained by cost and geography in the way that normal events are. And we will shortly be giving you a program of events running up to and beyond Christmas, and I would welcome any offers to give a George talk or ideas for a George talk, so that we can make this part of what brings the Orwell Society membership together. The first George talk after today will be Darcy Moore talking about Orwell in Paris on Sunday the 12th of July. This event is taking place as all our birthday celebrations for George Orwell, who was born on June the 25th, and we're normally in Sutton Courtenay for the nearest Sunday to that, if it's not a 25th. And we thought it was important to keep the tradition going, and Helen and her wardens have kindly given you the image of the grave that you can see on the top of your screen if you've not enlarged it. The plan for today is that Helen will say a few words of welcome from the parish and explain her links, the links of the parish to George Orwell and its importance to them. She told us a few minutes ago that just while they were stood at the graveside, they'd had 6 random visitors coming to see the grave. After Helen has said her few words, I'll hand over to Richard, who will read an essay of his father's that he's selected, and give us his own welcome and some other thoughts today. So thank you all very much for coming, and over to you, Helen. Could we unmute Helen, please? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Quentin. It's a real privilege to be here today, and I hope you can clearly see the picture of Eric Blairs' grave. I'm sorry for, I've got a very low 4G here in the churchyard, surrounded as I am by the big yew trees, but I hope it gives you a clear enough image. We're really sorry not to have been able to welcome you all in person to Sutton Courtenay. We'll look forward to doing that again next year. But we do have a steady stream of visitors throughout the year, and indeed throughout lockdown, people have still been coming to visit the grave. We know they come because they place all sorts of strange objects and money on top of the grave from all different nationalities and countries all over the world. So we regularly collect them to the building fund. But as I say, in just the 15 minutes we've been here, we've had 6 visitors already, and I can see a couple of other people wandering around the churchyard, and no doubt they will make their way to this corner eventually. So it's good to be able to welcome you today virtually from all across the world to this lovely piece of England where Eric Arthur Blair lies.
Thank you very much, Helen. Richard, over to you.
Right, good afternoon everybody, and thank you for turning up for this virtual tour of Orwell's birthday, which is in strange circumstances. Before I do my reading, actually, I'd like to just, well, thank you, Helen, indeed, for your introduction. And I'd like to just say, there's a few words I wanted to say before I actually start. First of all, I'd like to thank Professor Richard Keeble for his, he's now stepped down as chairman of the Society. Richard joined us in the AGM of 2013 and decided to step down a few months ago. Richard, thank you very much indeed for everything you've done for the Society, especially with your gavel, which will be sorely missed. But joking apart, we would like to thank you for instigating the dystopian essays, which have been running now for several years and have actually been very successful. And I hope that this will continue later on. So from there, we would also like to welcome our new Society Secretary, Dr. David Craik, who has joined us a few weeks ago. And he actually, once he was elected on, although I think he has to wait until the next AGM to be officially elected, he has actually hit the ground running and has done remarkably well so far. And thank you, David, for picking up the reins so quickly. Also, we have to thank Quentin, who has stepped into the breach to become our interim chairman. And he will do so until next AGM. And because of the pandemic, we've taken the chance to actually step back a little bit and kind of take stock of where we are within the Society and try and make some decisions which this pandemic gives us a chance to think about things. I personally would quite like to see closer ties with the foundation in some ways, the Orwell Foundation, especially the Youth Prize, which I think we would have, that we have things to talk about there. So hopefully later on in the year, Quentin and I have said that we would probably like to go down to London and talk to the foundation for the Youth Prize and see if there aren't some commonality which we can exploit. Without further ado, then, I will like to do a reading from the Facing Unpleasant Facts narrative essays. In fact, the essay is Why I Write, which was written in the summer of 1946. From a very early age, perhaps the age of 5 or 6, I knew when I grew up I should be a writer. Between the ages of about 17 and 24, I tried to abandon this idea, but I did so with the consciousness that I was outraging my true nature and that sooner or later I would have to settle down and write books. I was the middle child of 3, but there was a gap of 5 years on either side. I barely saw my father before I was 8. For this and other reasons, I was somewhat lonely, and I soon developed disagreeable mannerisms which made me unpopular throughout my school days. I had the lonely child's habit of making up stories and holding conversations with imaginary persons. And I think from that very start, my literary ambitions were mixed up with the feeling of being isolated and undervalued. I knew that I had a facility with words and a power of facing unpleasant facts, and I felt that this created a sort of private world in which I could get my own back for my failure in everyday life. Nevertheless, the volume of the serious, i.e. seriously intended, writing, which I produced all through my childhood and boyhood, would not amount to half a dozen pages. I wrote my first poem at the age of 4 or 5, my mother taking it down to dictation. I cannot remember anything about it except that it was about a tiger, and the tiger had chair-like teeth. Good enough phrase, but I fancy the poem was a plagiarism of Blake's Tiger, Tiger. At 11, when the war broke out of 1914-18, I wrote a patriotic poem, which was printed in the local newspaper, as was another 2 years later on, about the death of Kitchener. From time to time, when I was a bit older, I wrote bad and unusually unfinished nature poems in the Georgian style. I also, about twice, attempted a short story, which was a ghastly failure. That was the total of the would-be serious work that I actually set down on paper during all those years. However, throughout this time, I did, in a sense, engage in literary activities. To begin with, there was the made-to-order stuff, which I produced quickly, easily, and without much pleasure to myself. Apart from schoolwork, I wrote verses d'occasion, semi-comic poems, which I could turn out at what now seems to me an astonishing speed. At 14, I wrote a whole rhyming play, Imitations of Aristophanes, in about a week, and helped to edit school magazines, both printed and in the manuscript. These magazines were the most pitiful burlesque stuff that you could imagine, and I took far less trouble with them than I now would with the cheapest journalism. But side by side with all this, for 14 years or more, I was carrying out a literary exercise of quite different kind. This was the making up of a continuous story about myself, a sort of diary existing only in my mind. I believe this is a common habit with children and adolescents. As a very small child, I used to imagine I was, say, Robin Hood, and picture myself as the hero of thrilling adventures. Quite soon, my story ceased to be narcissistic, and in a crude way, and became more and more a mere description of what I was doing and the things I saw. For minutes at a time, this kind of thing would be running through my head. He pushed the door open and entered the room. A yellow beam of sunlight filtering through the muslin curtains slanted onto the table, where the matchbox, half open, lay beside the inkpot. With his right hand in his pocket, he moved across to the window. Down in the street, a tortoiseshell cat was chasing a dead leaf, etc., etc. This habit continued until I was about 25, right through my non-literary years. Although I had to search, and did search for the right words, I seemed to be making this descriptive effort almost against my will, under a kind of compulsion from outside. The story I suppose, have reflected the styles of the various writers I admired at different ages, but so far as I remember, it always had the same meticulous descriptive quality. When I was about 16, I suddenly discovered the joy of mere words, i.e. sounds and association of words. The lines from Paradise Lost. So he, with difficulty and labour hard, moved on, with difficulty and labour he, which do not now seem to me so very wonderful, sent shivers down my backbone, and the spelling of he for he was an added pleasure. As for the need to describe things, I knew all about it already. So it is clear what kind of books I wanted to write, insofar as I could be said to want to write books at that time. I wanted to write enormous naturalistic novels with unhappy endings, full of detailed descriptions and arresting similes, and also full of purple passages in which words were partly for the sake of their sound. And in fact, my first completed novel, Burmese Days, which I wrote when I was 30, but rejected much earlier, is rather that kind of book. I give all this background information because I do not think one can assess a writer's motives without knowing something of his early development. The subject matter will be determined by the age he lives in. At least this is true in tumultuous revolutionary ages like our own. But before he ever begins to write, he will have acquired an emotional attitude from which he will never completely escape. It is his job, no doubt, to discipline his temperament and avoid getting stuck in some immature stage or in some perverse mood. If he escapes from his early influences altogether, he will have killed his impulse to write. Putting aside the need to earn a living, I think there are four great motives for writing, at any rate for writing prose. They exist in different degrees in every writing. And in any one writer, the proportions will vary from time to time according to the atmosphere in which he is living. They are: 1, sheer egoism. desire to seem clever, to be talked about, to be remembered after death, to get your own back on grown-ups who snubbed you in childhood, etc., etc. It is humbug to pretend that this is not a motive, and a strong one. Writers share this characteristics with scientists, artists, politicians, lawyers, soldiers, successful businessmen. In short, with the whole top crust of humanity. The great mass of human beings is not actually selfish. After the age of 30, they abandon the individual ambition. In many cases, indeed, they will almost abandon the sense of being individuals at all, and live chiefly for others, or are simply smothered under drudgery. But there is also the minority of gifted, willful people who are determined to live their own lives to the end, and writers belong to this class. Serious writers, I should say, are on the whole more vain and self-centered than journalists, although less interested in money. 2. Aesthetic enthusiasm. Perception of beauty is in the external world, or, on the other hand, in words and their right arrangement. Pleasure in the impact of one sound on another, in the firmness of good prose or the rhythm of a good story. Desire to share an experience which one feels is valuable and ought not to be missed. The aesthetic motives is very feeble in a lot of writers, but even a pamphleteer or a writer of textbooks will have pet words and phrases which appeal to him for non-utilitarian reasons. Or he may feel strongly about typography, width of margins, etc. Above the level of a railway guide, no book is quite free from aesthetic considerations. 3. Historical impulse. Desire to see things as they are, to find out true facts and store them up for the use of posterity. 4. Political purpose. Using the word political in the widest possible sense, desire to push the world in certain directions, to alter other people's ideas of the kind of society that they should strive after. Once again, no book is genuinely free from political bias. The opinion that art should have nothing to do with politics is itself a political attitude. It can be seen how these various impulses must war against one another, and how they must fluctuate from person to person and from time to time. By nature, taking your nature to be the state you have attained when you are at first adult, I am a person in whom the first 3 motives would outweigh for the 4th. In a peaceful age, I might have written ornate or merely descriptive books, might have remained almost unaware of my political loyalties. As it is, I have been forced into becoming a sort of pamphleteer. First, I spent 5 years in an unsuitable profession, the Indian Imperial Police in Burma, and then I underwent poverty and a sense of failure. This increased my natural hatred of authority and made me, for the first time, fully aware of the existence of the working classes. And the job in Burma had given me some understanding of the nature of imperialism. These experiences were not enough to give me an accurate political orientation. Then came Hitler, the Spanish Civil War, etc. By the end of 1935, I had still failed to reach a firm decision. I remember the last 3 stanzas of a little poem that I wrote at that date, expressing my dilemma. I am the worm who never turned, the eunuch without a harem. Between the priest and the commissar, I walk like Eugene Aram. And the commissar is telling my fortune while the radio plays. But the priest that promised an Austin 7 for Doogie always pays. I dreamed I dwelt in marble halls and woke to find it true. I wasn't born for an age like this. Was Smith? Was Jones? Were you? The Spanish War and the other events of 1936, 1937 turned the scale, and thereafter I knew where I stood. Every line of serious work that I had written since 1936 has been written directly or indirectly against totalitarianism and for democratic socialism, as I understand it. It seems to be nonsense in a period like our own to think that one can avoid writing of such subjects. Everyone writes of them in one guise or another. It is simply a question of which side one takes and what approach one follows. And the more that one is conscious of one's political bias, the more chance one has of acting politically without sacrificing one's aesthetic and intellectual integrity. What I have most wanted to do throughout the past 10 years is to make political writing into an art. My starting point is always a feeling of partisanship, a sense of injustice. When I sit down to write a book, I do not say to myself, I'm going to produce a work of art. I write it because there is some lie that I want to expose, some fact to which I want to draw attention. And my initial concern is to get a hearing. But I could not do the work of writing a book or even a long magazine article if it were not also an aesthetic experience. Anyone who cares to examine my work will see that even when it's downright propaganda, it contains much that is full-time politician and would consider irrelevant. I'm not able, and I do not want, completely to abandon the worldview that I acquired in childhood. So long as I remain alive and well, I shall continue to feel strongly about prose style, to love the surface of the earth and to take pleasure in solid objects and scraps of useless information. There's no use trying to suppress that side of myself. The job is to reconcile my ingrained likes and dislikes with the essentially public, non-individual activities that age forces on all of us. It is not easy. It raises problems of construction and of language, and it raises in a new way the problem of truthfulness. Let me give you one example of the cruder kind of difficulty that arises. My book about the Spanish Civil War, Homage to Catalonia, is, of course, frankly, a political book. But in the main, it is written with a certain detachment and regard for form. I did try very hard in it to tell the truth, or the whole truth, without violating my literary instincts. Amongst other things, it contains a long chapter full of newspaper quotations and the like, defending the Trotskyists who were accused of plotting with Franco. Clearly such a chapter, which after a year or two would lose its interest for an ordinary reading, must ruin the book. A critic whom I respect read me a lecture about it. Why did you put in all that stuff, he said. You've turned what might have been a good book into journalism. What he said was true, but I could not have done it otherwise. I happen to know what very few people in England have been allowed to know, that innocent men were being falsely accused. If I had not been angry about that, I would never have written the book. In one form or another, this problem comes up again. The problem of language is subtler and would take too long to discuss. I would only say that in late years, I have tried to write less picturesquely and more exactly. In any case, I find that by the time you have perfected any style of writing, you have always outgrown it. Animal Farm was the first book in which I have tried, with full consciousness of what I was doing, to fuse political purpose and artistic purpose into one whole. I have not written a novel for 7 years, but I hope to write another one fairly soon. It's bound to be a failure. Every book's a failure. But I do know with some clarity what kind of book I want to write. Looking back through the last page or two, I see that I have made it appear as though my motives in writing were wholly public-spirited. I don't want to leave that as the final impression. All writers are vain, selfish, and lazy. And at the very bottom of their motives, there lies a mystery. Writing a book is a horrible, exhausting struggle, like a long bout of some painful illness. One would never undertake such a thing if one were not driven by some demon whom you can neither resist nor understand. For all one knows, that demon is simply the same instinct that makes a baby squall for attention. And yet it is also true that one can write nothing readable unless one constantly struggles to efface one's own personality. Good prose is like a window pane. I cannot say with certainty which of my motives are the strongest, but I know which of them deserves to be followed. Looking back through my work, I see that it is inevitably where I lacked political purpose that I wrote lifeless books and was betrayed into purple passages, sentences without meaning, decorative adjectives, and humbug generally.
Thank you very much, Richard. That was excellent. What we're going to do now is invite Helen to take us and show us the river room, which is a wonderful extension they've built on the church, which in a very modest way we as members have contributed when we've been to the church. Before doing that, I just want to say one small thing. Without spending a penny of your money, we now have a posh London West 1 address. Ben Whittaker raised the money to have the statue of Orwell put at the BBC, and Dame Janet, his widow, led the trustees to get that wish fulfilled. She chose the Orwell Society to be the people to hand over the custodianship of that statue. And Neil Smith and the BBC and the respective lawyers have done a sterling job to make this happen. And very recently, we've now taken full ownership of that statue. And if you hadn't, I wanted you all to know that. So over to you now, Helen.
Great, thank you. So while you were talking, I just started walking up the churchyard, and I've just paused at Asquith's tomb. He's the other famous resident of our churchyard. And then now I'm walking towards the east end of All Saints Church, and you will begin to see the outside of the river room. And I hope that my signal will hold up for this. I won't be able to go inside because it's still a building site. Because of the coronavirus, the building was delayed, but it is almost finished. And so there you see the church building, and then I move round and you'll see the outside of the river room, which is amazing. So it's a large meeting room. It can fit 50 to 60 people in it. We've got 3 toilets now, and there's also included an office space as well for our parish administrator. And I'm now stepping onto the outside terrace so we can open these wonderful bifold doors and have lovely outdoor gatherings as well, hopefully in due course. And I'm just walking down between the church and the river room, and there's this beautiful, I'm not sure how it comes out on the filming, but there's a lovely curved entrance area glass which marks the link between the old vestry, which those of you who have been for our cream teas will know is was very low standard and not very good for serving cream teas. But in the new building, we've now got a complete kitchen with all modern facilities. And I'm going to see whether you can peer through the windows. I'm not sure. I don't think that's going to work because the sun is going to blank it out. But we've also got a beautiful bit of stained glass, specially commissioned by a contemporary artist who lives in Oxford, and he's designed a window based on the theme the River of Life, and that's at the east end of the building, which is there. But unfortunately it works better when you're in the building than when you're outside. But we really look forward to welcoming the whole of the Orwell Society back next year, if not earlier, to come and sample the delights of the river room. It would be great to welcome you there. And one of the things that we're going to do within the river room is have a permanent display about George Orwell and why he came to be buried here in our churchyard.
That's wonderful. Thank you very much, Helen. Well, as you'll have seen from some of our messages, if it is at all possible between now and Christmas, we will arrange a date with Helen and Fred and the wardens, who've done a wonderful job looking after the grave, to have a visit to the church as a social get together, and give us all a feeling of shaking off some of the feelings of being stir crazy, and just have a relaxed social event and come and visit the church and the grave, and have lunch in the
You'd be
swamp.
welcome any time. Yeah, you'd be welcome any time. You really would. It would be lovely to welcome you back.
Thank you very much, Helen. Well, I hope you've all enjoyed today. I look forward to seeing as many of you as possible on July the 12th. And now Neil will unmute you all, and I'd just like you to say thank you to Richard and to Helen and to Neil for doing the clever stuff to record all this, because we're going to keep all the George talks, and they will be available on the website for the future. So thank you very much, everybody.